Here we go. 1931. And again, we are playing with the white pieces. And again, I'm going to play 1e4. Okay. Yeah, I'll go over that, Herbmaster. I'll be sure to go over that after the game. So he plays d5. This is called the Scandinavian opening. And I have a very fun fact about the Scandinavian I'll share after the game. Now, the reason that I don't recommend the Scandi to most players is because you bring the queen out early, very early before the other pieces. If you've seen Searching for Bobby Fischer, you'll know that that's another great chess movie. In the movie, the main character, he has a problem with bringing the queen out early. And the problem with bringing the queen out early is that I'm able to develop my pieces and attack the queen at the same time, which gives me a lead in development. In addition, I'm going to control the center now by playing d4. Continue my development. Normally, you want to develop your knights before your bishops. And this is what? And maybe somebody with a little bit less experience, remind me what this is called. And how do we defend against this? What can we do about this? This is called a pin. I can't move my knight. I would drop my queen. And the way that we can defend against the pin, there's two main ways. We can try to get this bishop out of the picture, or we can intercept the pin with one of our lesser value pieces, in which case we can now move our knight, and that would simply lead to a bishop trade. That's fine. We don't need to move our knight. We just can if we wanted to. So now we're going to continue developing. And now let's centralize our knight. And when I say centralize, I mean literally put a piece on one of the central squares where the piece is the most active. Now we haven't completed our development. There's a bishop. The bishop has not been developed. Where should we put this bishop? Let's give him a taste of his own medicine. Yeah, we got a huge raid from Charlie. F5. So I think you guys mean G5. Yep, bishop to G5. What is this? This is a pin. But look at his position. He's passive here. He's really cramped on these last couple rows. Look at my pieces. They got a bishop, knight. They're all well placed. And guess what? When all of your pieces are well placed like this, you immediately need to, and Charlie would be the first to tell you this, you got to think about attacking. Now, in order to attack, we need to open up some files and avenues toward his king. And one idea that comes to mind, look at this rook very carefully. Do you remember, guys, in the last game, I had a plan. Let me very quickly show you. Oh, it doesn't let me look at the last game. So I had a plan where I basically opened up that F file. Sorry, one sec. Oh, there it is. I basically needed to open up that F file by playing knight d2, f4, and f5. Can you see the parallel here? What can white do here? It's the same exact plan. We can go f4, f5, open up the file for the rook. And this rook is also going to put a lot of pressure on the knight. So that's where pattern recognition happens. And that's why I always emphasize to people, if you want the fastest way of improving, look at your own games. Figure out your mistakes, figure out what you should have done, and you can use the computer for that, and try to build off of that. Try to kind of collect in your mind, or even in a real notebook, the various ideas and the plans that you think are cool that you could apply in a future game. That's what makes chess so magical. There's always a next game, and there's always an opportunity to correct your mistakes. So let's see what he does now. Now c5 would be no problem. We would just take on c5, and our king can be tucked away into the corner here where it's very safe. And he's in some trouble. He's in some trouble because we're about to play f5. We can also bring this rook into d1 in order to support the pawn on d4. Why would we do this? Because he might move his bishop back, and if he moves his bishop back, then his queen is going to attack our pawn. It would be a good idea to defend it. Okay. It's not that I don't care about the clock, but I think the explanation is more important. Now, can we play the move f5? Is that a good idea? Or do we want to prepare it? What do you guys think? There's actually something better that we can do. Well, there's quite a few good things we could do. I think that we should go f5. Let's see what happens. In a tournament game, I actually myself would not play f5, and I'll explain why after the game, but he takes. Now what? Well, we can recapture. We could also capture his knight, but there's no need to do that. Let's accumulate the pressure. Rook takes f5. Now the f file has been opened. Okay. Now things get really interesting. Okay, so let's unpack this situation. We have a knight here. How many times is the knight defended? 1, 2, 3. The knight is also being attacked 3 times. We don't need to worry about it because the knight is defended the same number of times that it's being attacked. So one thing that we would consider doing here is bringing all of the pieces into the game. We can do that in several different ways. So one of them is to go rook a to f1. This is called doubling the rooks, where the 2 rooks are stacked on the same file. And this increases the pressure on the f file. Now he's got a very, very strong move here. He doesn't find it. He plays takes, and now this is a fork. It is true. We are also pinned. It's the same thing we saw in the last game. We're forked. We fork him, but we're also pinned. But still, look at his knight. That knight is under so much pressure. Look at all of our pieces staring it down. As soon as this knight is captured, that king is going to be in huge trouble because he's going to recapture with a pawn. He's going to have to. Okay, and he finds a cool idea, but it doesn't... Well, does it work, though? Ooh. These people are good, ladies and gentlemen. So he seems to blunder a bishop. Let's see what his idea is. And he gives me a fork. He forks my king and the rook. Are we screwed? Are we screwed? We are not. We can drop the rook back. We can drop the rook back, simultaneously defending against the check and the fork. And now we're simply up a piece. He plays knight d5. We capture it. And now all we need to do, and we have a very cool idea, I'm going to unpin myself. I'm going to unpin myself. If he takes my rook, he resigns. Now there was something very cool here. If he would have taken my rook, and I'll explain everything, what would I have done in this position? I would not have recaptured his rook, which would be fine. There is actually a very cool checkmate. Thank you, Quams, and we had a sub that I missed. I apologize for that. Thank you, Radyakasa, for the sub. Queen takes f7 is back rank mate. Exactly. Takes, and goodbye, Kingovich. Exactly. Okay, so let's walk through that. And as you can see, the opponents are getting better. These games are becoming more competitive, which is what's making this fun. Now, he played the Scandi. Okay, knight f3, bishop e2. Again, unpinning ourselves so that the knight can now move. We did move the knight. Did I blunder the pawn here? Why didn't my opponent take on d4? What was my idea? Who can tell me? Yeah, and I'll show you guys everything in a moment. Well, what this move accomplishes is that it opens up the d file. As we've already seen, you want to be careful about giving rooks open files, because open files can lead to checkmate very, very quickly. Thank you, 5 Norlax, for the tier 1. His queen has to move back. Just visually, look at how active my pieces are. His pieces are basically on their initial squares. Black is in very big trouble. Well, I have a story about the Scandi. I've told this story before. Funny story, and then we'll move on for the to the game. The year is about 1895, and 2 strong British players are facing each other. So in the 1800s, there used to be a very old rule in tournament chess that if you touched a piece that had no legal squares, you had to move your king. Okay, that was just a rule. In order to discourage people from, just touching all the pieces. Right nowadays, you're not punished for that, but it is touch move. If you touch a piece in official tournament chess, you have to move it. So this guy touches the bishop on c1, and maybe he looked at the position wrong or hallucinated. Now, the bishop has no legal squares, right? It's blocked in by its pawns. So he had to move his king. And he chose the most disastrous time to do it. What does black have in this position? This is one of the shortest games in chess history. Because amazingly, black has the move queen e4 checkmate. This is not a mate that everybody's familiar with. It's a 3-move checkmate. Not the fastest that's possible, but look at white's king and the queen. They're in a standoff. King has no squares. The queen controls all of them. Little rhomboid shape here. Anyways, I think that guy did not have a very good day after that. But let's go back to the game. So essentially, he didn't take our pawn. We pinned his knight. Why didn't we play the move knight e4, applying pressure on his knight on f6? The reason is very much the same. Remember, again, connect the patterns. Bishop e2 unpinning us from this pin, and symmetrically, he can do exactly the same thing. He can play bishop e7. His queen is no longer pinned, and the knight on f6 is now very, very well defended. So I can trade a bunch of pieces here, but that's not good for me. Trading pieces lessens the intensity of the attack. When you're attacking, you need pieces deliver checkmate with. And that's why I played f4. Okay, so f4, f5, takes, rook to f1. And then he finds this very cool idea, bishop takes c5 and queen d4. So this is a fork because he's attacking the king and the rook. If I move the king, he takes the rook. I can't take back because his queen is defending the rook. Now, rook e3 is the defensive move. Now, he had a better try here than what he did. He could have... What was this better try? What was this better try? Oh, why wouldn't I play f5 in tournament chess? So the reason I wouldn't play f5 is because I was a little bit scared of his response, queen to b6, attacking the pawn on d4. If I was playing a grandmaster, I would have played a slower move, such as rook to d1. So knight to g4, you guys are absolutely correct. Knight g4 was a better try. It's the same exact thing as after knight d5, except I don't control that square. So he wants to take my rook. Can somebody spot white's response? I had seen this, and I calculated one step ahead. Queen e3, he still takes the rook with the queen. It's not knight d1, although you're very close. It's not queen f3 either. If we try queen f3, I understand what you guys want to do. But remember, in comparison to that thing we talked about, he's got two rooks on e8. So queen f8 is not backrank mate. Smash factors. Amazing. Some of you are getting it. The move is rook to d1. How do I come up with this move? What does it do? Two things that it does. We attack the queen, right? We attack the queen. So if he takes our rook with either piece, then we take his queen. And if you calculate the variation, then at the end of the day, white is up a whole piece. I'm up a bishop. That's huge. That's winning. If he takes with the knight, now I'm up a queen. Now you might be looking at this and saying, okay, but no problem. I mean, can't he just move his queen back to b6? And once again, we're faced with the same idea of him taking on e3. But this is what you have to do. You always have to try to detect how the position changes as a consequence of the last couple moves. And if you look very carefully at this position, you can't play rook e8 because of the pin. That's what a pin is. That is illegal because the king will be under fire, right? This is what a pin is. You cannot expose your king by law. So if you look at how the position is changed, you can now take the knight. The knight is no longer defended. He takes the rook. We take the rook. He takes the bishop. We move the king away. The smoke is cleared, and white is now up a knight. Okay. What about rook to f4? Great question. Rook to f4 has the same idea, but it's the wrong execution. Jimmy Garoppolo would find this move instantly because there's an interception that happens. We accidentally intercept. I'm a big 49ers fan, yes, and I'm kind of sour about how things are going. The rook on e3 is no longer protected. And I am from the Bay Area, by the way. Anyways. So that's basically the idea. Now queen f2 to unpin ourselves and attack f7, which caused him to resign. Okay, Dusan 555, and we're playing with the black pieces. Let's play the Sicilian. Lucas 8. The Sicilian is when you play c5, and the opening that I have been playing almost exclusively, well, never mind, because he does not play the main line, which is d4. He plays c3. This is called the Alekhine Sicilian, named after a Lithuanian chess player. His idea is to prepare to control the center with the move d4, okay? Now, what we need to do here as black is we need to immediately contest the center with our pieces. So we're going to get the knight out in order to attack his pawn so that he doesn't have a chance to play d4. He goes bishop to d3. Big baloney, thank you. That's not a great move because now we can occupy the center and his bishop has blocked the other bishop from coming out, which is something you want to really, a situation you want to try to avoid. He's gone e5 attacking our knight. Can somebody tell me where should we put this knight? Where should we go in order to attack this pawn? White is not worse here. This is a line. But yeah, knight g4. Let's get to this pawn. Let's try to win it. Now, his correct move, yep, he plays it correctly. Very nice. He goes bishop b5 to attack my knight. The usual, let's unpin that knight so the knight can once again move. There's a lot of trap. This is a line I used to study. Ah, but ladies and gentlemen, we have a very sexy move here. Look at this bishop. We've encountered this tactic many times before. And those of you just joining, I'll show you guys after the game the precedent. We can play knight takes e5, I think. If I'm calculating this right, I might be dropping a piece here. Now, what am I doing? Well, what I'm doing is that this bishop look at it very carefully. It's hanging, which means if he takes the knight, we take his bishop. But if he takes the bishop with check, thinking, then I'm going to take the knight. Nope, because this very same knight it's double parked. It's going to take the bishop, and at the end of the day, we're going to be up a pawn. We're up a pawn, but we still need to complete our development. And we're not just up any pawn, we're up a center pawn. It worked. It worked like a charm. Now, he's doing exactly what I did in the previous game, which is he's trying to open up the f file. It's a pretty nasty idea. Can we stop him from going f5? Not physically, but can we take the sting out of that move? Can we try to prevent it? How? Who can tell me? And this is a very instructive moment. So we go g6. And after the game, I will explain why we don't literally stop him. Why not f5? There's a reason for that. Be patient. I'll explain that after the game. I've noted it down. Now, why does g6 stop f5? Because it adds another defender. Remember, pawns capture diagonally. It adds another defender to f5. So if he goes f5, we'll just take it. What is the other thing that this move accomplishes? And first, what we're going to do here is let's lock up the position a little bit so that we can focus on completing our development. The other thing that it does is that it creates a little hole for the bishop. This is called fianchettoing the bishop. It's an Italian term, which means to put the bishop on the longest diagonal on the chessboard, either this one or this one. Generally, fianchettos happen on g2, b2, b7, or g7. And now we are going to complete our development by castling. Now we need to come up with a plan. We need to come up with a plan, and we need to come up with well, first of all, let's take a look at this knight. We can trade, possible, but this knight, let me tell you, has perhaps the sexiest outpost of all time. Where can this knight travel to? Who can spot a very nice square on the board, in the center of the board, where this knight could land? Let's go. Oh, absolutely. This is called an outpost. An outpost is a square in your opponent's territory where a piece cannot be bothered by any pawns. If you look at the pawns, they've advanced past this square, so they can never chase away the knight. This is called an eternal knight in Russian. Now, is this knight on e5, is that knight eternal? Is that knight eternal? Is this on an outpost? Can we show him that this knight is... No! Get out of here! It ain't eternal. Nope. Out. And guess what? Once he moves his knight, out. If he goes back to e5, we're going to take it with our bishop. Now, why would we give up our bishop? Because look at our bishop very carefully. The bishop isn't really doing anything anyway. It's just biting on granite, as I like to say every single stream 50 times. So we might as well give it up for his knight and rid ourselves entirely of that nuisance. Now look at this knight versus his bishop. This is a classic case of good knight versus bad bishop. Our knight is on an outpost. His bishop is incredibly cramped. But we need a plan. We can't win this game without a plan. What could our plan look like? How could we transform this positional advantage into something specific? So there's two main plans here. We could play on the queen side, or we could bring pieces into the king side and try to attack his king. Because I don't have much time, let's do the second thing. And also because but we can also combine. Let's combine the plans. Let's now go b5 to just lend some reinforcements to b5. Remember, you can combine plans in chess. You can do two things at the same time, particularly if you have very active pieces. You can multitask. That's okay. Play on both sides. So we're going to try to prepare the b4 pawn breakthrough, but at the same time, we're going to keep an eye on possibilities for attacking his king. Okay. And I'm going to play a little bit faster here. Now, if he knows what he's doing, he's going to play a3 to prevent me from potentially preparing b4. And then I'm going to have to redirect my attention to this side of the board. Okay, so let's first test him a little bit. Let's prepare b4. Hopefully, well, no. He doesn't go a3, so we might as well strike with b4. Okay, why am I doing this? What am I accomplishing? Well, what I'm accomplishing ultimately is I'm trying to open up the b file. Why is it important to open up the file? Because if we open up the file, this rook on b2, you see that it can infiltrate to b2. The second rank is prime real estate. This is, Central Park, New York real estate for the rook. And he's doing our bidding for us. He's allowing me to open up the file for the other rook. So there's going to be hell to pay. We're going to trade queens here. And you guys might, wait a second, why are we trading queens? Well, because we've got more than enough pieces to checkmate him with, even without the queens. Watch. Okay, what do we do now? Somebody remind me. God Aves, thank you for the sub. True 3 false 3. Thank you for the 2 months. Let's go. Let's go. Let's go, let's go, let's go. Rook b2. Infiltration. Now we're going to put the other rook on f1. It's going to be not checkmate immediately. We shouldn't rush. But he's either going to get checkmated or he's going to lose a bunch of his pieces. So we're going to give him a check, forcing his rook to drop out. We can't take the classic sort of Russian, very old school, take the rook, take the pawn, promote. Look at the domination of the knight over the bishop. Neither of these pieces have moved a muscle since move 17. So that's been the narrative of the game. That's been like the unspoken sort of backdrop in which everything has proceeded. Without a bishop, and this bishop is essentially a big pawn, he just can't play. He doesn't have the sufficient horsepower, literally and figuratively, to sort of prevent me from just ravaging his position. I'm going to push the pawn out to a3. This pawn isn't going anywhere. He gives me a meaningless check. This king could evacuate to h6. Nice little square. And here we need another plan. I'm going to play this slowly. I'm going to advance my pawns on the king side. No need to rush here because white is completely paralyzed. 150% paralyzed. And this is a mistake I see a lot of players making, is just to rush. You don't need to rush in a position like this. You can make all the necessary improvements, push that passed pawn down the board, and then we're going to combine that with the other passed pawn. g3. Knight defends the pawn, so he cannot take it with his bishop. Okay, this is a nice positional game, actually. Total domination. The king is perfectly safe because there's no... If he gives me a check, I can go to h6. He probably is going to give me a check. That would be my prediction. Although, okay, rook a6, close. So g2 check. Okay, so now what do we do? Who can tell me the move? And now it's time to finally do something specific and win some pieces. Oh, knight g5 is a sexy move. Oh, I love that. I didn't even see that. Now, my idea was to go rook to a1 and win his bishop. That would have been possible. That would have been sort of the brute force method. But this man is a savage. This knight is going to f3. What's the idea? Well, let's actually just ignore him. The idea is to get the knight to f3, dislodge the king, and then promote our pawn and make a queen. We're not even bothering to win any of his pieces. Okay, king takes h6. Yeah, and he's going to give up the rook for the knight, but that doesn't help his cause because the game is over. Okay. Look at this domination. Rook's going to move out, and we're going to finally... We can actually even take the bishop. We need to be careful. Now, in such positions, remember, do not pre-move because you might stalemate your opponent. Be very careful when you've got a bunch of extra pieces about stalemating your opponent. That's why I don't recommend pre-moving too much unless you're absolutely sure that you haven't pre-moved something which could lead to stalemate. And the game is over. 48 moves and a nice game. Okay, so let's unpack this. He went c3, we went knight f6. Now bishop d3 is already an inaccuracy. And bishop d7. Remember this idea. It should be seared in your memory by now. And I've shown you guys, those of you who are joining for the first time, what I like to do sometimes during the speedrun is to show examples from real games that I played in over-the-board tournaments to show how I applied various ideas that I'm applying in the speedrun and to show how this kind of learning proceeds. So the game that I always like to show when we have a tactic like this is the following game from 2010, which reached the following position. I had the black pieces against an international master. My rating back then was 2356. So I was a master, but not yet a grandmaster. This position that you guys now see, 2010, July 11th, I played Icelandic international master. He was rated exactly the same as I was rated. And in this position, very complicated position, he plays the move bishop to g5, trying to exert pressure on my knight. Who can spot my response? And some of you will remember this game. I don't mean to keep repeating it, but just want for the benefit of the new people to show this one more time. Knight takes d5 is correct. Same exact idea. If bishop takes e7, then, well, it is a lecture. That's basically my idea. Knight takes e7. Same knight gives it. Same knight that takes the pawn takes the bishop. If he takes the knight, then I take his bishop, and the queen defends the bishop on g5, which I applied in this game. It's literally the same thing on the other side of the board. Thank you guys. I am very spoiled, and thank you, Crazy Zamarigali, for the tier 1. Knight takes e5, right? Same exact thing. It's just a slightly different version of it. Bishop is protected. Knight protects the bishop. Literal transposition of the pattern. g6, stopping f5, fianchettoing the bishop. We lock up the position first. We complete our development, and we get the knight to e4. Now, the typical mistake that I see players make in the 1900 rating range and below is this tendency to automatically trade when you're up material. So you're taught when you're a beginner that when you're up material, pawn, piece, you want to simplify, you want to trade. And normally that's true, but I've insisted from the very start of the speedrun that you should be very discriminating about how you go about trading. There's no need to trade the knight because our knight is much better than his knight. And that's why we get the knight to e4, kick his knight away, and now we get a brilliant good knight against bad bishop situation. And this is like a textbook position. I've been on the receiving end of many such positions with a good knight basically dominating a bad bishop. Well, can you give us an example, I hear you say? I absolutely can, if you guys just give me one more second. And again, I can't emphasize enough just how much it's important to approach your games seriously and to try to learn from them, because then you're able to directly apply them. We'll look at the following position. Almost exactly the same thing. Watch this. This is actually kind of cool. It's almost the same squares, just a slightly different position. Well, look at this. This is not from the speedrun game. I was black against the Grandmaster 2009. Look, knight on d5, totally dominating, completely dominating the bishop on d8. In the center of the board, supported by the pieces, the bishop has no prospects, and eventually, it was precisely the knight that won white the game. I eventually got my bishop out, but I got checkmated. This was from an knight off. So coming back to the speedrun, we see a different position. You know, you don't want to be overgeneralized, but it's very, very similar. The bishop is just terrible. The knight is amazing. And the knight is on an outpost. It's completely unassailable. Okay, so essentially what we did now is we combined two plans. We attacked on the queen side, and we attacked on the king side, but he basically helped us. He opened up the file, which allowed this rook now to infiltrate at the correct moment to f1. Rook takes g1, and we played it old school. We just traded the rook and took the pawn. That was not the only way to win. Could somebody find another possibility in this position? How else could I have transformed my position to my favor? And I'm going to show you guys another example from a very famous game. Thank you, Vren42, tier 1ing. Now, we could have played knight to f2. Moise Devi, thank you so much. I appreciate it. Exactly. Now, this is a fork. He has to take the knight. And then we play rook, f1 takes f2. This is called piggies on the 7th. These rooks are going to massacre all of white's pawns. Checkmate is threatened. White has to create some air for his king. But basically, black takes all of white's pieces, and this is easily winning. Now, here's the thing. I promise, last detour. There was a very famous game. And the point that I want to make is this. When you have a good piece against a bad piece, such as a good knight against a bad bishop, right? What you want to be very careful about is making categorical statements like, I will never give up. Well, you never do want to give up in general, but I will never give up my good piece for my opponent's bad piece. Because in chess, you have to understand the concept of transforming your advantage, going from one type of advantage to another. And what that sometimes requires is giving up a piece that looks really nice for one of your opponent's pieces that looks kind of bad. And there was a very, very famous example of this by none other than the man that's in the photo frame behind me, Bobby Fischer, who was playing a match for the World Championship against, well, not yet, but a candidate's match against Tigran Petrosian. And he did something very, very similar. Here you guys go. Here we go. Bobby Fischer White, 1971. One of the most famous games, actually, of all time. Now, this position occurred on the board between Fischer and Petrosian. Now, I want you guys to compare. Look at this beautiful piece, outpost, supported by a pawn in the middle of things. Thank you, J Dark Side. Look at this Pathetic little bishop here on d7. Ugh, not doing anything. Look at this pathetic bishop. Guess what Bobby Fischer does in this position? Guess what he does? He does something that shocked the players who were watching the game. They thought, is he hallucinating? What did he do? He took it. Damn, girl, what are you doing, Bobby? He takes the bishop. What is he doing giving up this beautiful knight? He transforms the advantage, because guess what? He gets the c file, and look very carefully at this pawn on a6. This is the pawn that he's going after. What he's trying to do, by taking the bishop, he is removing the primary defender of this pawn. Petrosian would have put his bishop on b5 or back to c8, and he would have kept this pawn protected. So what Fischer decides is, I'm going to go after that pawn by trying to get my rook to c6. Petrosian stops him, but much like in our game, Fischer gets one rook to the 7th rank, and I'm going to fast forward, and he gets the other rook to the 7th rank. So quite literally, it's a very similar narrative here, and he checkmates black. Petrosian resigned here because he cannot stop the rook maneuvering itself to h8. I don't want to go through the details of this, but that's just to show you guys that this kind of stuff happens all the time. Okay. So that was that game. So back to the speedrun transformation of the advantage. Now we decided to go old school, taking the rook, taking the pawn, and just promoting our pawns. Now knight g5 was a really nice move, preparing knight f3. We could have also gone rook a1. That was my intention, and taking the bishop and leaving us up a knight. Okay, you were going to explain f5 instead of g6. Thank you for reminding me. It is in my notebook. I appreciate it. Why did I not just brute force stop f5 with f5? Could somebody explain this to me? Narrative, I like it. That is not the same Tigran Petrosian. Unfortunately, he passed away in the 80s, the world champion. Today's Tigran Petrosian is a grandmaster, same name, different person. We weaken the e6 pawn. Now, actually, ladies and gentlemen, it's not queen h5 check. This is innocuous because black can go g6 to block the check. Okay, so that is part of it, but that's not strictly speaking the reason is the pawn on e6. Look at how weak it is. And the definition of a weak pawn is a pawn that cannot be protected by any other pawns, right? That's the dictionary definition. But not all weak pawns are bad. It's just that this one is very easy to attack because it's also an artery to the king. Got to be very careful about that. Not a disaster. We can defend it. But why allow something like this? Why give white a target? Okay? Hopefully that makes sense. So that's why I played g6. Now this pawn is nicely protected. Rook e1 is innocuous. We can just keep developing. So what's the lesson here? Be very careful about creating what's called a backward pawn, a pawn that's behind its neighbors, particularly one that's next to your king. Every time you push a pawn out like this, especially the f pawn, just try to very quickly check to see whether you create any weaknesses and whether these weaknesses are easy to attack. Okay? What would you take with if he had pushed f5? Well, if he had pushed f5, I would have definitely taken the g pawn to keep that e file closed. I definitely would not have taken to the e pawn and allowed something like this to happen.